The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome today to the Air We Breathe seminar, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time that you dedicate to this. My name is Tedra Cheatham. I'm Executive Director of the Clean Air Campaign, and I have June Dean, State Director of the American Lung Association in Georgia, here with us. June is the State Director who is for the American Lung Association in Georgia, as I said, which is now in its second century. And as a leading organization in the state that is fighting for air, working to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. June has played an instrumental role in advocacy work for many years in the state, giving Georgians a voice in the conversation about smoking issues, asthma, air pollution, and public health. So we're thrilled to have June here with us. You'll hear from both of us over the course of the webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping notes to set expectations. In order to make sure the audio for the presenters is as clear as it can be, your phones are currently muted. If you'd like to pose a question, you can type it into the question field that you see toward the bottom of the GoToMeeting toolbar on your screen. And what we'll do is we'll address any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. This webinar is also being recorded for playback later, and so if you'd like to share it with someone else, we'll have it posted on the Clean Air Campaign's YouTube channel later. So that'll be a great way if you feel the need to share this with anyone that we're happy to do that. So we'll go ahead and jump into the video, the webinar rather. First of all, I'd like to offer Happy Air Quality Awareness Week to you. We really appreciate you celebrating Air Quality Awareness Week with us. This week calls attention to the air we breathe and how each of us plays a role in protecting it. It also gives us a moment to reflect and take inventory of the progress we're making in Georgia for cleaner air, as well as all the work that lies ahead. We kicked off this week Monday, April 29th, with a special proclamation signing with Governor Deal. So you know that we have support from the very top of the chain here in Georgia. And this webinar education event has become an annual fixture in our efforts to get the word out. So we're glad to have you join us today. The Clean Air Campaign is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that works on the voluntary behavior change efforts of individuals and businesses to improve air quality, with an emphasis on reducing traffic congestion, idle reduction, and reducing miles driven alone. We also have a Clean Air Schools program to help educate students on the positive effect of air quality of riding the bus, carpooling, or walking or biking to school. And you'll hear a little bit about that, but there are opportunities to learn more. June, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the American Lung Association in Georgia?
Certainly. As Tedra told you earlier, our mission is to fight lung disease and promote lung health. And toward that end, we work for clean, healthy air, both indoors and out. We help people quit smoking and teach children not to start. Some lung diseases like asthma and emphysema have no cure, and we help patients and their families cope with and lessen the impact of their disease through a myriad of programs and services. We have one of the largest asthma camps in the nation. Camp Breathe Easy is now in its 34th year. We fund research, and lung cancer is becoming a much larger focus for us because it appears with a lot of things coming together, we may be poised to see some significant improvements in disease management for lung cancer, which would just be wonderful. We still work to ensure the public is protected from the spread of tuberculosis, which is how the Lung Association began. And nearly all of these issues that I've just mentioned have a public policy component, and that is a way to really move forward change for lung disease.
Great, thank you so much, June. Briefly, let's put things in perspective. We've just come through one episodic challenge, which was our pollen count. We had some astronomically high rates recently. We can't do anything about that, but we want to talk over the course of this webinar about some of the changes that we can have an effect on from some personal choices that we make, and really talk about what's happening as we move into smog season and talk about how each of us actually have an impact on what we do, unlike what we just went through with pollen. And June, do you want to go ahead and start with this?
Yes. Today we'll cover health effects of air pollution and some of the sources of air pollution, the link between transportation and air quality, our 2013 State of the Air report, and a little more information about what's happening now to clean up the air, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. And moving on to our first topic, we'll talk about the air. Our efforts around clean air really came full force in 1970 when the Clean Air Act was implemented. It was passed by President Nixon in Congress to tackle growing concerns about air quality. And this led to the EPA. And interestingly enough, this progression mimics the creation of our nation's public health system in the early 1900s, which was formed to fight tuberculosis. It followed a similar track. And tuberculosis is a very, it's much smaller than it was in terms of being a public health threat than it was in the early 1900s, so we can hope for the same thing with clean air. There was not a lot of health research available in 1970, so part of the Act required that the science would be reviewed every 5 years to ensure that air quality standards were meeting the goal of protecting the public's health. The standards address 6 kinds of air pollution. And in Georgia, we focus a lot on ozone and particle pollution, and they are among the hardest to contain. Proposed every 5 years, EPA panel of scientists reviews the science at hand and makes recommendations as to whether or not new standards should be entertained for air quality. And these proposed standards face a rigorous review throughout that process. There are public hearings and comments, reviews by the Office of Management and Budget, and the executive branch. And needless to say, the Lung Association takes very great interest in all of this and work hard to promote this process because it's very important in the quest to make sure that we are doing our best to protect the public. And once the standards are approved, the states found out of compliance have to submit something called a state implementation plan. And that's submitted to the feds for their approval. And once there's an approval, we have a few years to implement the plan. So a standard that is reviewed and may be adopted in, say, 2013 may not be full force in our state until, say, maybe 2018, just depending on the factors at hand. And let's move on to some of our primary concerns. One in particular is ozone, and I'm sure you are probably somewhat familiar with it. Ozone is a gas, and it's a lung irritant, and it affects the lungs in a manner similar to a sunburn. That's been a comparison that's been made. And it's formed in the atmosphere. When gases come out of tailpipes and smokestacks and combine with heat and sunshine. So think of it as a sort of noxious cocktail in the air. The gases are known as nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, and carbon monoxide. So take NOx, VOCs, and CO and cook them in the presence of heat and sunshine, and you get ozone. And we have progressed to the point that we are often able to predict high ozone days, and at that time the Clean Air Campaign will usually generate a warning or an alert to companies and schools and lots of interested parties that we may have a high ozone day or an exceedance of the air quality standard. And they encourage you to drive less, conserve electricity, maybe fill up your car or truck after dark. And these actions can have a very positive effect in maybe ameliorating the impact of a potential ozone exceedance. So we always encourage people to follow those recommendations whenever they're offered. The risks from ozone exposure, you can see here. Those most at risk are the young and the old, people who work hard or exercise strenuously outside during a high ozone day, children who play outside under some of these same conditions. People with lung and heart disease are particularly sensitive to ozone exposure. There's a group of healthy people who respond adversely to ozone exposure for reasons that we're not entirely sure. We hear often about children with asthma being particularly impacted on high ozone days. Just an interesting story. During the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, we all worked hard to drive less. We took transit, telecommuted, avoided driving in high traffic times because we had this just crowd of people coming in very hot days. And we just needed to be able to carry it all off. But scientists took a look at that and found that the admittances for emergency problems for children with asthma was much lower than that time than for a comparable period of time the previous year, when we didn't have all those people in and we didn't have a lot more going on. And that had to do with the fact, we can surmise, that we all drove less, we all took transit more, we telecommuted, we avoided driving in high traffic times. So that is a real testament to the impact that personal choice can make in improving our air. Particle pollution are dirt and aerosols, and it's tiny, tiny particles. They're highly transportable. We get pieces of soot and dirt that may come from several states away. The harm in particle pollution is that it's so very tiny that it eludes the lungs' natural defense system. The lungs are your first line of defense against dirt and debris entering your body, and the tiny cilia move that out. But these particles are maybe a tenth the diameter of a human hair, so they can lodge deeply in your lungs and cause problems. And particle pollution is not seasonal. It can be a problem any time of year. And here you see some of the risk of breathing these tiny particles. This is a more dangerous pollutant. And we're learning a whole lot about particle pollution and the impact that it can have. It's also very hard to contain, but we're making great strides in lessening particle pollution exposure. And as you can see from this slide, there's a number of sources that contribute to air pollution issues. And some are the same for both particle pollution and ozone. And in terms of particle pollution, we measure it two ways. One is year-round exposure, and one are short-term spikes. And you know, those short-term spikes can come from different sources for different reasons. One that might be very familiar to you is when we have those huge fires in South Georgia, and sometimes the smoke and debris travel up our way. But you know, we can have particle pollution year-round, winter as well as summer.
So one of the things we at the Clean Air Campaign work on is really trying to help show that link between transportation and air quality. We have focused on mobile sources because about 50% of all the smog-forming emissions come from tailpipes of cars and trucks. So that represents some immediate, actionable opportunity to make a change. As we go through these next few slides, consider how much vehicle traffic actually factors in to our daily habits. Here in the metro Atlanta area, about 82% of people drive alone to work. And when you start thinking about your daily commute, you can measure this up with the whole region to see that about 4 out of 5 Metro Atlanta commuters drive alone to and from their jobs. So you can tell there's a lot that we can do. We have 82% of the people in the Metro Atlanta that we really can still work with to try to make some different choices. There has been an upward trend in the number of people that are choosing alternatives to driving alone in the Atlanta region, but there's a lot more we can do. In fact, every day in Metro Atlanta, commuters and workplaces participating in some of the clean commute options that we'll talk about later help eliminate 1.1 million miles of vehicle traffic from our roads, and they keep about 550 tons of pollution out of the air we breathe. So you can see that we are making a difference. We're moving in the right direction, but there's a lot more that we can do.
As you can see here, Americans drive a lot, nearly 3 trillion miles each year. And while our cars, pickup trucks, and SUVs are much cleaner, we drive a lot more. And during the past 4 decades, the growth in the number of vehicles has outpaced the growth in the number of drivers, households, workers, and people. And with all that driving comes threats to your health. Pollution from cars does threaten your health. Gasoline cars, trucks, and SUVs generate much of the total highway pollution. Those pollutions contribute to the burden of ozone and particle pollution that we present in our State of the Air report each year. Another cautionary note, living near busy roadways increases your risk of breathing traffic pollution. Running down a busy street when you're exercising in the evenings, not a good idea. You're sucking in a lot more pollution than you would otherwise. Concentrations within about 0.3 of a mile from a major highway are much higher. Now I want to introduce you to our State of the Air report. Our State of the Air report allows the Lung Association to provide air quality information in a format that's easily understood by the public. We use school grades, and it's readily tracked over time. We're in the 14th year of our report. We use the most recent quality assured air pollution data collected and certified by EPA, and we use 3-year periods. So for the 2013 report, we measured air quality from monitors for 2009, 2010, and 2011. The report grades counties and ranks cities and counties based on their scores for ozone, year-round particle pollution, and short-term particle pollution levels. There's still a lot of unhealthy air. 131 million people live in areas with dangerous levels of ozone or particle pollution. The State of the Air does show continued air cleanup progress, but there's still too many places with unhealthy air days. We estimate that 4 out of 10 people live in counties that received an F for air quality in our 2013 State of the Air report. Overall, and we like to look at trends, and we're able to do this, since this is a 14-year report, we had for years seen a beginning decline in ozone. And we're still seeing improvement from a lot of cities, but some had more pollution than we had seen in the past.
And June, correct me if need be, but I believe there are a number of factors that influence the air pollution. Everything from travel patterns that people have, the amount of rain, and when you start overlaying our drought issues, the temperatures that we had in certain summers, those really make an impact on that, along with the prevailing winds, as we know that people always want to know what the air quality is right where they stand, but if, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes we can have effects from neighboring states depending on the winds. So that's something that we all need to be aware of.
That is true, and that's why we collect data for a 3-year period, so that it can mute to some degree those anomalies that we may have in weather or other issues like fires and that sort of thing, because we're trying to get as true a picture as possible of our air quality. And we had a little not good news in terms of particle pollution as well. And in the Northeast, of course, they have a lot of problems with wood burning and fires, and so, and us to a lesser degree here in Atlanta with big fires. But overall, in the 14-year period, we've seen some declines in the air quality, in particle pollution, which we're proud to see, but we may be leveling off, or there may be some of those anomalies that you mentioned earlier that impacted some of the numbers that we saw this year. In the State of the Air report, you will see trend reports that look at our grades over the years, which I think provides a good perspective about this. But we still have a whole lot of work to do. Let me say a few words about Atlanta. For years, the metropolitan area has been in the top 25 most polluted cities for ozone. This year we dropped to 28th in the nation. Now, part of what that means is that there were 27 other metropolitan areas with worse ozone than we had. But we have seen some declines over time, but we may be starting to level out. We just don't know, because we saw a slight increase in polluted days over that 3-year period, and we'll just have to continue to monitor the reports that we get and see if this was an anomaly, or see if we are indeed starting to climb back up. We also saw slightly higher year-round levels of particle pollution, and we tied for the 18th most polluted in the nation for year-round particle pollution. And again, whether air currents may be a factor, or it may be the beginning of a reversal in years of diminishing pollution levels.
So having that information on a local level for us, it's really important for us to stay informed about our current conditions so that each of us can reduce our exposure to unhealthy air. And here's the Air Quality Index, which should look familiar to a lot of people. The Air Quality Index is a useful tool to help people understand how healthy or unhealthy outdoor air quality really is, so that if you're in a sensitive group, you will be really aware of these. You'll feel that. You'll have the effects of it. But it's really good for all of us to see, so that we can decide if maybe it's projected to be a poor air quality day, that maybe we decide to move our exercising indoors instead of along some of those busy corridors that June had mentioned earlier. From what we know about Georgia, there's a large asthmatic incidences. There are a large number of asthmatic incidences here, and that's really important as we think about how each of us works to do our part to improve the air quality. According to the Georgia Department of Health, an estimated 12% of the children ages 0 to 17 years, that's almost 300,000 Georgia children, have asthma. Many of you on the webinar today may have asthma yourself, or may have a child or know of people that do have asthma. Among children with asthma, hospitalization rates are highest for those that are 4 and under. So those are the really young folks that don't have as fully developed lungs and that may be the most sensitive. Conversely, about 600,000 people, or about 9% of adults in Georgia, have asthma. And we see that asthma is more common in women than in men. So these are people that really need to be very aware of what's going on in this air quality index. And one of the ways that you can do it is by signing up for smog alerts. When the air quality index is projected to be bad the next day, you'll actually get an alert if you sign up at cleanaircampaign.org, and those alerts will be pushed out to you so that you can be prepared to maybe change your commute patterns or your exercise patterns the next day. As you heard from June's summary of the State of the Air report, there are always these ups and downs. There are the prevailing winds, the rain issues, the temperatures. But we look at these over trends over time, and you can see on this graph how those trends actually laid out. Again, we're doing better in a lot of ways, but there's still some of those spikes, and choices that we individually make can have an influence on those spikes. When you look at the code red days, so those are those that are unhealthy even outside of the high sensitivity groups, you can see that there shows a trend of a long-term decline in the number of days when unhealthy air is present. But you still really need to, we need to all be very aware of these choices that we make, because even though those orange days spike a lot, and we're seeing a decrease in the red ozone days, until we really strive to get those numbers even lower, we still will feel the call to action.
There are some special reasons for this long-term improvement, and we would attribute a lot of that to the Clean Air Act. And so the new standards, the stronger emission control equipment, improvements for coal-fired power plants, converting fleets of diesel trucks, buses, trains to low-emission vehicles have made a big difference. You might remember when lead was reduced in gasoline in the 1990s. That necessitated a big cleanup. So, and now we're going to see some big cleanup in power plants, and that's going to make a big difference as well. But that would not be possible without the Clean Air Act guiding that, because this is a massive process when you're talking about cleaning up the air, and lots of things have to be taken into account. So we fought for, the Lung Association has fought for a lot of these changes, and we're proud to see a difference. And for these and other reasons, we support stronger standards for cleaner gasoline in vehicles, and making those standards final can help us reduce pollution that threatens public health. And this summer, the EPA will be holding hearings on reducing sulfur in gas and tightening auto emission in vehicles. And you'll hear more about that through the summer. And if the process moves smoothly through, we may see a decision by the end of December as to whether or not these stronger standards for reducing sulfur emissions will go through. So there's lots to be done about clean air, and you can also go to the Lung Association's website at lungusa.org and learn lots more. And one thing we're proud to offer is an app for State of the Air, and also for getting forecasts for air quality in your area for today and tomorrow. So that's also available free of charge on our website. You can learn a lot about the state of our air quality at stateoftheair.org as well.
Thank you for that, June. That's great to know that we can have that app opportunity available so that we can go out and look for information. And a reminder, of course, that you can go to cleanaircampaign.org and sign up for in less than 10 seconds to actually get the alerts pushed out whenever we do have projected high smog alert days. We have about 20,000 people that are already registered for that, and we'd love to have you, all of you that are on the webinar, as part of that alert list. So June and I definitely want to leave you with the idea that there's no reason for you not to be aware of what's going on, and we are very appreciative to especially our meteorology friends that actually talk about this a lot of times on the evening news as well. When we're talking about tools that you can actually put into place every day, there's a whole range of things, and some of those are depicted here. The Clean Air Campaign actually works to distribute Georgia Commute Options program along with some of the other partners. And there are free tools and services to help workplaces and commuters increase their use of carpool, van pool, telework, transit, bicycling, and walking as a way to alleviate traffic and air pollution at the same time. We work with more than 1,600 workplaces who participate in these programs, and all of these are offered at no cost. So as you can see from these toolbox, we can do everything from looking at your workplace and seeing where employees are commuting from to try to help them find options through some of our ride matching services. We can also come in and look at your organization and, again, with our free services, and set up a formal telework plan or to try to help educate your employees on how to be good teleworkers and, of course, managers on how they can effectively manage telework employees. So there's lots to do if you contact us that we can help with. Along with our assistance, here are some of our partners listed here, and you can see that everyone from the perimeter area through Perimeter Transportation, the Sustainability Coalition, the Buckhead area TMA, Clifton Corridor, Midtown Transportation, Atlantic Station's efforts, and downtown efforts in the Cumberland area, and of course our efforts outside of that. We can all work as a team to come in and try to help your workplace be as effective as possible and to really help the employees to make some good choices on that. When you're looking at some individual things that you can do at your workplace or even in your home, besides changing your commute, you can look at some things like you can see depicted no idle zones. We work a lot with reducing idling in delivery areas, passenger drop-off pickup areas, and we have this kind of signage that we can help give you at no charge to remind people to turn that off. You might can, on high smog alert days, you might can decide to bring your lunch to work that day. Besides saving a little money, you also keeps you from having to get in your car and drive. And speaking of getting your car and driving to lunch, you might want to choose to, if you do drive, to go to a restaurant and actually walk in the restaurant rather than sitting and idling in drive-through lines or banking lines. It might be a great way to sneak some exercise into your day, too, by deciding to leave your car parked and walking for your errands on those days. June, did you have some other ideas of ways that individuals can make a difference?
Well, that you mentioned, and if you are a parent with kids, encourage using the bus or carpooling the kids to school. Don't idle in the drop-off lines for picking up or dropping off your kids, and encourage the schools to pass a no idling policy so that these little kids aren't walking by these buses that are idling forever. And there's also assistance for schools to retrofit some of these school buses to cleaner natural gas, and that needs to be looked at as well. But we make choices every day that can make a big difference. And if you will just remember that story about the Olympics, how in the quest just to be able to get around and cope with all of the people coming in for the 1996 Olympics, we actually shaved off some high levels of ozone, and that resulted in fewer ER visits for kids with asthma. And I think that's a real positive way to look at some research there. And we often call children with asthma the canaries in the mine because they respond so quickly to some of these lung irritants.
That's great. Thank you for pointing that out, June. I know you had mentioned earlier about maybe filling up your tank if you do decide to drive, filling that up later in the day so we don't have that noxious cocktail that's caused with heat and sunlight. So if we can wait until after 6 or after dark, then that's great. And of course, you hear a lot about choosing Energy Star appliances. Shut your electricity off, unplug things that aren't necessary so you don't have that phantom electricity going out, and of course reducing your speeds or staying near the speed limit. Those are huge things that each of us can make choices to do every day. As we're moving into the summer months, I know some of our yards are starting to get a little unwieldy. Maybe even making sure that your lawn mowers are tuned up, or if you're in charge of those responsibilities at a commercial property, working with the landscape companies to make sure that they are all operating at highest efficiency on that, so that we're not leaving any of those stones unturned. If you're wanting some more information on things you can do, you can again go to cleanaircampaign.org to register for smog alerts. We can hear about the Clean Air Schools program and learn some more information about that, on how to institute that in your local school, and also get some of that science behind air quality that we've talked about earlier, but as a good reminder. You can also learn more about Georgia's Commute Options program. You can go to gacommuteoptions.com, and that's where you can find those ride matching services that we talked about, talk about finding a carpool or van pool partner, and those workplace consulting opportunities we have to address parking issues that you may have, or talk about teleworking, some of those other things. Do you want to remind people from your side, June?
Only to say that please remember we all share the same air, so we all are invested in making our air cleaner and healthier to breathe. And so pay attention. This is Air Quality Awareness Week, and maybe urge people in your company or business to do one thing to improve the air, whether it's being more cognizant of turning off the lights and using less electricity, carpooling once a week, what do you call it?
Trip chaining.
So that you trip chaining. That's right. So that you you sort of bundle up your errands. Just make a commitment to do something to help clean the air, and you'll feel better too.
Thank you so much for that. We've already had a few questions come in that we'd like to address. So thank you for your interest in this topic, everyone on the line. June, a question came through and it said, we've seen some information about Metro Atlanta and the northern areas of Georgia, but can you talk a little bit about the state of the air report on some of the southern areas of Georgia and other areas of the state?
Yes, give me a second to get back to my notes at that particular slide. I will tell you, along the coast, we do show a lot cleaner air. Brunswick, Savannah, Hinesville, Fort Stewart, we had no unhealthy days for ozone pollution, even though it is kind of a busy area. They really benefit from having the from being near the coast and taking advantage of those winds. I mean, Florida's a good example. They don't register a lot of pollution on monitors, even though it's highly populated, because it's a peninsula. Now, I will say, in the Macon, Warner Robins, Fort Valley area, they tied for 14th for the most polluted city for annual particle pollution. So certainly the Macon area has some challenges there in terms of improving air quality. And some of the Athens and some of the less populated areas tended to do better. We saw Augusta do better than it has in the past as well.
Great. Thank you for that, June. Also, a question came up that you might want to address. Besides the mobile sources that we talked about lawnmowers, and that 50% of smog-forming emissions comes from tailpipes of trucks and cars, do you want to talk a little bit about other sources of emissions in Georgia?
Well, certainly a big one in Georgia are power plants. And several regulations have gone into effect to curb emissions from power plants, and power plants have taken steps with scrubbers and things like that to reduce emissions as well. But we have a lot of power plants in Georgia, and I understand that some of the older ones will be retired, and that will make a difference. We also get pollution from other states, particularly particle pollution, and so some regulations were put in place a couple of years ago that dealt with air transport, because we sent pollution to several states and we got pollution from several states, particularly in the east, and that was challenged in court. So that's an issue that's yet to be resolved. There are lots of other stationary sources, but that's probably the big one. I mean, some companies have generators attached to big buildings. There are lots of things that contribute as well. But the big ones for us are tailpipe emissions, smokestack emissions.
Great, thank you for that. There was a question about the relationship between location and air quality, and I know that June had addressed one of those. Down the coast, they have the prevailing winds, which helps with their smog issue. But really, when you start looking at some of the other things that we're working with some of our partners, like the Atlanta Regional Commission, for instance, on when you're talking about your location and air quality, is about making more walkable communities where you don't have to get in your car and drive from one place to another. It's a huge thing when you can walk out to lunch and not start your car up, or you can walk to the dry cleaners. You can do the trip chaining to try to organize your service providers in a way that makes it more efficient for you to use them. And of course, when you start looking at these centers of activity, we're seeing a lot more trend of people moving more into the city, closer to their works because their work locations, because they don't like that long commute. It allows for some more options, maybe for some additional transit options. Also, I know that we have several people in our office that live close enough where they bike to work every day. But those are things that make a huge difference where you live and where you work. So I think there's a whole combination of things, and there are lots of partners in the metro Atlanta area and across the state that are really starting to look and see how locating schools, locating businesses, and locating residences near businesses and service providers may really make an impact on the choices people can make on how to get to and from work and how to get to and from their errands. And I also see someone made the suggestion of using the media more on air quality alerts. I appreciate that. We do try to work very close with a lot of our media partners. And again, our meteorologists do a great job of getting information out in the area in the evening before there's a projected high smog alert potential for the next day. But I do appreciate that comment. We'll continue looking at that. Also see that someone said something about they're seeing more awareness in the schools, and that's a great opportunity for me to talk about a little bit about our Clean Air Schools program. We work with hundreds of schools across the state on K through 12 and work on everything from that no idling issue to make sure buses and moms and dads that are dropping their kids off at school don't idle when they're in lines. When you think about it, those little young lungs have a really hard time when they're standing so close to the tailpipes when they're waiting on the bus or waiting on mom and dad to pick them up. And with the amount of asthma that we see in children across the state, that goes to bigger social issues like missed days of school and, of course, some of those trips to hospitals and emergency rooms. So we are working every day with schools across the state, and again, I'd appeal to you, if you have a child in school or if there's a school in your neighborhood that you don't see those no idle signs up, please let us know. We'd love to go out, especially if you have a contact out there that we can reach out to see if we can implement something there.
Yeah. And I will also add, there's some sort of innovative things going on around schools. I'll brag on Mothers and Others for Clean Air here. They have supplied many schools in Fulton County and some of the surrounding areas with color-coded flags to be hoisted when the Clean Air campaign lets us know that there is ozone exceedance projected, to remind parents, teachers, and everyone that you may need to curb a lot of outside rigorous playtime or look for some other things to do, maybe practice football, maybe do some calisthenics on a real bad air afternoon. But making, it's taking a step further, the air quality alerts, to put them into put action into practice there. And another, this is a new thing, they are working on a project with a couple of schools to plant vegetative barriers, which is evergreen shrubs and trees next to a couple of schools who've been identified as having their play area right next to an interstate or very heavily traveled road.
Yeah,
and the goal is to try to mollify or create a barrier against some of that particle pollution.
Thank you for bringing
their way.
That's been a movement that we have started to see in a lot of our schools when they're really talking about the effects on children, especially during their playtime or their exercise time. And that ties back into another question we got about that someone said, as a runner, what can they do? I think that goes back to trying to find pathways that aren't next to those highly congested roads. I think in June's slide she showed that within 0.3 of a mile of a highly congested road, the air quality seems to be much worse. So I think as a runner, if you pick your path with that in mind, that would help. And of course, on those really bad air quality days, you may want to choose to do a different kind of exercise that may be inside or move inside to a treadmill. Maybe this is a little opportunity for you to cross-train a little and do some exercises inside instead of hitting some of the running paths. There was a question, June, that I wanted to see if you could address, because people want to know what your opinion may be on why ozone numbers are getting better, but particle pollution numbers seem to be worse and trending in the wrong.
Well, both were making some improvements for a while, and in terms of, and so really with this last report, while the overall trends show improvements over a long period of time, we don't want to stall out. And I could only speculate, but we need to look very closely at our numbers and what the monitors show. And we also need to make sure that we've got monitors in good working order around the country. And that goes back to a federal funding issue to make sure EPA and the states have the money they need to make sure we're getting good numbers representative of the air quality. So we've got a couple of issues to really make sure that we are addressing before we make too many assertions. And because there could be a blip, we could have a hot, dry drought one year. We could have a fire in South Carolina. We could, there are all, or Florida. There's all kinds of things that might happen once or twice that can impact something. But you really do need to look at a few years worth of data to see how it's trending. But we have more and more. We use more. I'm sure we are using more and more electricity. We have many electronic devices today that we didn't have 10 years ago. So our dependence is not lessening. But we can do a lot. and we really do need to look at these proposed clean gasoline standards. It could really benefit an area like Atlanta.
I know we're nearing the end of our time period, so wanted to address a few things on a few last questions that our attendees had. One of the questions was any long-term plans to improve transportation. There are some things going on in several areas of the state. Those regions agreed to have additional penny tax, and so they have decided to tax themselves to do some specific projects. So that is something that's going on. Outside of our window every day, we see the streetcar project in full force. So from a very local last mile of connectivity issue, we do see streetcar investment in town. There are lots of things. One of the things that we talk about the Clean Air Campaign is that infrastructure does not just mean asphalt and the roads. When you talk about the fiber optic lines that we have all across to allow telecommuting, that plays into our transportation infrastructure. When we talk about some of the things that Greta has, like their express buses, the park and ride lots that are around the state, van pool routes that we have, all of these all feed into our whole transportation infrastructure, along with our bike paths, walking paths, all of those feed in. So we need to start taking a bigger look at what our transportation network actually looks like, because there is limited funding. Federal funds, we hear about in the news every day, are being squeezed. Our state funds are being squeezed. So we're going to have to be a little more creative in what we do and really take a broader view of what our transportation network actually means. So I know that our local governments, our state government, and even our federal government, when they're looking at the investments into transit, are really trying to tweak and the systems that we have in place and really have a bigger emphasis on those voluntary trips that we can use by sharing rides or teleworking. There's a question on here about Georgia getting funding for electric trains. Not sure about that. I haven't heard anything about that, so I don't have a good answer for that.
Well, I think it is to be dreamed, and and certainly there has been talk for a number of years and work and federal ask made for to tie us to North Raleigh in North Carolina, and then maybe tie us through to Macon to the coast. And in long term, I mean, we're going to have to look at those things. It's worked in other countries, and it could certainly help us.
We're going to go back to the slide real quick just to wrap things up. Here are the lung.org, which I don't believe we mentioned earlier, along with that 1-800-LUNG-USA helpline that's available for information. We have the Georgia Commute Options website, gacommuteoptions.com, the cleanaircampaign.org website. There's also Clean Air Schools website that you can look for through that cleanaircampaign.org site to get more information, so we can answer some questions about individual schools. And June, we have a lot of questions on here about specific air quality in different regions of the state. Can you tell people where that State of the Air report is located so they can see exactly what the air quality situation is in their particular region?
Very happy to do that. It is stateoftheair.org.
Great.
You can go there and look for, select Georgia, and it breaks it out by counties where we have air monitors in place, so you can see the recommendations of the readings from those monitors. And also there's an app that you can download too that will allow you to check some of those things.
Well, terrific. Thank you again, June. We really appreciate you imparting some of this information to us today. I'd like to thank each one of the attendees that were on the webinar today. Thank you for taking an hour of your time to learn more about this. Please feel free to use those resources that were presented. to find out more information, and feel free to contact either one of us. Know that the American Lung Association in Georgia and the Clean Air Campaign and its partner organizations are doing what we can on a broader scale to try to help improve air quality in the state of Georgia, but it really takes each one of us doing our individual part to make a difference. So that would be, I think, the request of the American Lung Association in Georgia, June, your organization and ours, is for each of us to try to do our individual parts. So thank you. Happy Air Quality Awareness Week, and we look forward to cleaner air ahead. Thank you very much.